There are a ton of things in this OTA. It is one of the larger and more directly metagame impactful OTAs in Marvel Snap. Let's jump into it. A bunch of Thanos changes foreground this whole OTA. It's going to be changes to Thanos himself and 3 of his stones. The major change, the front-facing one, is that Thanos will no longer start in your hand if you are playing a Thanos deck. This means that 34-card Monty is likely to be DOA. That is a deck that was very reliant on Thanos in opening hand as a thing that it actually counted on. I am a little surprised that Second Dinner didn't really feel the need to try to nerf the in-hand Thanos at all, and instead was just very confident that getting rid of this mechanic was the right way to go. There are several former Magic the Gathering designers on the Snap card design team, to the best of my knowledge. There was a mechanic similar to starting in your opening hand in Magic. It was called Companion, and it was famously so broken that they had to errata change the fundamental workings of the mechanic and add a tax onto it in order for it to not be super broken. I think that this could have perhaps informed the thinking around Thanos starting in hand. It's cool, but once decks start actually abusing that, like 34-card Monty did, it's better to just get it out of the game rather than leave it in there and allow for further abuse potential. I think that's a solid way to approach this, although I am, again, surprised they didn't try going 6'10 on Thanos, 6'9 on Thanos. They were just like, nah, we want to keep him there, but we want to make sure that he is not starting in hand. So the big number one thing to take away from this is 34-card Monty kind of eating it here. Space Stone is gaining a point of power and also losing a bit of text or gaining a bit of text. This looks like a nerf to me. Space Stone is now drawing Thanos. I would have preferred if it drew Thanos if you didn't have him, and then drew a card if you did have Thanos, but it's possible they ran into a limitation on card text size or complexity that they didn't really want to push up against. I will say that this now compares meaningfully to the Agamotto spell. It's a 1/3 that draws the card if you don't have it, although I think based on the size of Thanos decks, it might be a little bit better. Downside, of course, I mean, zooming out, right? It's 50-50. If you have this in your deck above Thanos, it's really good. If you have this in your deck below Thanos, it's really bad. And I think that that ultimately ends up amounting to a greater nerf to Thanos than just the change to having him not start in hand. I appreciate that they're still trying to get the stones to work around Thanos, but these two changes are nerfs, and even though we're getting some points back on this one, there's going to need to be some substantial buffs. Luckily, there are other stone changes happening, like Time Stone getting its drawback. One of the things that made Time Stone so strong when Thanos started in your opening hand was that it had effectively guaranteed value. Now that Thanos doesn't start in your opening hand, it does not have guaranteed value. That means it's very safe to put the drawback on this card. This is the change that, if anything, brings Thanos back from the 2 nerfs that it got in the previous 2 changes, is going to be the most impactful one. This is an excellent stone. It is the best non-yellow stone. Outside of the Mind Stone, which says draw 2 cards, there is not a better stone than the Time Stone. Being able to play Thanos, a big guy that can't get Shang-Chi'd on turn 5 for 5 energy, is one of the main draws to an archetype like this. Getting this back is very powerful. There is, of course, the risk that you don't have Thanos in your hand. And I think taking away that guaranteed ability to have him in your hand and make sure that all of this stuff was always affecting him, that can have upsides and downsides. I think downsides in terms of consistency, but upsides in terms of the power you're allowed to put on the rest of the stones. This was so far and away the strongest of them because it was always doing the discount, and doing a discount, getting the card in play, is always going to be better than making the card stronger once it's already in play. There is, of course, the larger aspect of Thanos to look at here, which is now all the stones are about him. This is going to be a deck that cares way more about Strange Supreme, way more about Mockingbird. you do not have your guaranteed Thanos, and that means that you are having to play these for value. Like, these stones have to be impactful beyond just the drawing of cards and the potential buffing of Thanos. We're kind of going back in time to before the Thanos as your commander, the icon of the deck era started. And I'm interested to see if that kind of Thanos can hold up in the metagame that we have now. Last of the Thanos changes, Reality Stone is getting a point of power as well. This seems, again, like they recognize that they nerfed Thanos a couple different ways, and giving Reality Stone a point of power brings it more in line with, say, the Merlin spell, things of that nature. It's definitely the kind of thing that makes sense to me. I wouldn't be shocked if more stones got power. I don't necessarily, when I look at, like, the suite of these Thanos changes in, like, context of everything that's happening, I don't think it's the world's biggest nerf, but I think it'll feel quite bad. Like, I think people will really notice missing the card. I'm not really sure how true that is. Like, I think maybe it'll sort of scale with how in touch you are. I know that if I queued up a Thanos deck and I'm playing Time Stone and then I don't have Thanos in my hand, I feel really stupid. If I'm playing Soul Stone and then I don't have Thanos in my hand, I feel really stupid. Like, it is definitely a meaningful nerf, because in as much as, yes, Time Stone got a draw back, I mean, Soul Stone lost half a draw, and you lost the card that started in your hand for free. So, you know, we effectively lost half a draw on Thanos, maybe more, depending on how much you value the card that started in your hand for free, being Thanos. I mean, 34-card Monty values that incredibly highly, but no matter how you look at it, this is Thanos getting nerfed, and I'm not 100% sure what that means for the archetype. I think it could still survive, but I do think it's going to be in the range of, like, losing a draw. For, like, that's how this is going to feel. Like, a decent amount of time, you're going to feel like you lost a draw when you play a Thanos deck post-OTA versus pre-OTA. This one makes me a bit sad. Galacta going to 4/6 and +2. I have long enjoyed Galacta being a +3, and I think that she wasn't necessarily imbalanced at +3. She was just very strong and sort of consistently a strong and important piece of decks, and I'm not really sure that's honestly going to change. She's still going to be better if you Surge her, she's still going to be better if you Zabu her, she's still going to be good with basically all the same stuff that she's good with now, but it does open up a little more design space for them in terms of making things that carry buffs. Largely, when +3 enters the game, things that carry buffs become incredibly problematic, because if they carry buffs well, i.e. something like Brood or Mr. Sinister, that becomes a very, very dangerous thing. These sort of buffs can scale multiplicatively. They scale more heavy than they would be indicated on the card. So I think while this is a fair change to Galacta, I did enjoy that there was a relatively balanced +3. And I don't mean, oh, it was like a totally fine thing to exist. What I mean is it wasn't like an objectively broken card. It was just, you know, pretty good, right? I think most people will say, you know, Shang-Chi, probably a better card than Galacta, probably more ubiquitous than Galacta. Shang-Chi's fine, but for some reason, +3 is not. And I think that, you know, whatever, that's fine. But I do kind of get sad at the idea that this reinforces the idea that +3 is a red line, because I honestly don't think that's true. I think Galacta is sort of proof that, like, you know, if you put it to, like, 4/4 or whatever, kept the +3, that would have been much preferable for me. Like, putting the power in the ability rather than taxing, and sort of taxing the base power of the card, as opposed to taxing the ability and giving her, like, a decent body to begin with. I don't know. I think there was a version of this where it was fine to put +3 on here. I understand why they opted against it. I get the design space arguments, but this one does make me a little bit sad. It also sort of indicates to me that, like, I often get asked about recommending cards for people to buy. And I think a lot of the time that's just a hard ask, because Marvel Snap is so context dependent. The best deck you can make is very often going to be the best deck you can make, and not necessarily the best deck full stop. But Galacta was one of those staple cards that it was always pretty easy to recommend, and I'm sort of averse to seeing those cards get changed in ways like this, because it does mean that, like, because there's no, like, dust refund in the way there would be in another game, like, this is the kind of thing where it's like, you got it to be a staple. That's really the whole appeal of the card, and if it's not going to be a staple going forward, it is a little bit of an awkward situation they're putting you in. However, I do think she's probably still going to be pretty damn good. I'm not really worried that there's, like, a huge risk. I just think they took the more boring option of the potential nerfs on the table. I would have rather seen 4-4, 4-3, any of that stuff before doing this. Here's another one that's like kind of objectively a fine and smart thing to do that I don't particularly love. Red Guardian losing a point of power. I think the argument for this is that, like, you know, Red Guardian, incredibly ubiquitous, incredibly powerful. It's basically metagame proof. There's always going to be something you can hit with it. It's always going to be on rate at 3-5. And so, like, when you examine it in that context, it's like, okay, well, yeah, that's a pretty obvious nerf candidate, and this is a pretty obvious nerf to do. Make sure it's not always an on-rate guy. Make sure you're actually sacrificing something to play tech. Make sure if you're going to interact with your opponent, you have to, like, go out of your way to interact with your opponent. I just worry that, like, this sort of ruins the promise of Red Guardian, because Red Guardian sort of accidentally kept metagames in line by giving these decks not necessarily a one-size-fits-all, because he doesn't fit all. And I think that's the important thing about him, is it's easy to look at him as a one-size-fits-all tech card that solves every problem, but he doesn't solve every problem. It's actually kind of not necessarily trivial to play around him, but it's relevant to play around him. I'm very confused why you do this in a world where Kid Omega just released, and people are going to want to maybe be able to answer that, especially when Kid Omega hits sort of the wider collection level thing. Like, I just don't know what the upside to nerfing this guy is. I can see that in an abstract world, this is a correct thing to do. I just don't think you do it right now, is sort of where my head is at. I would keep this guy around so that Kid Omega has more meaningful and plentiful counterplay. I don't really think this is going to kill him or anything like that. I think it's probably still going to be a card that people play in much the same way. And I think that's probably the argument for doing it like this, is like, well, are you actually going to cut Red Guardian? No? Okay, well then take the tax. Eat the tax. Eat the tariff here, right? And I get it. I think it's fine. It's probably objectively a correct decision. I just don't love the timing of it. This one is actually crazy to me. I think Misery decks are already pretty good. Like, Hood Misery V-Hand, already a pretty good thing to do. Is it the best thing in the game? No. Is it better than I would expect a deck that's getting buffed to be? Yeah. Like, 4-9 is maybe the best stat line you could possibly give something. 4-9 with upside can't be Shang-Chi'd, as big as can possibly be without being Shang-Chi'd. Potential to give you an extra hood. This is a card that also has synergy with Dormammu. A lot of Dormammu decks are doing this plus the 0-cost spell on 4. Really, really, really crazy buff to me. Like, this is wild. This is a very strong card already that is getting even stronger. One of the biggest winners of the patch, maybe the biggest winner of the patch. I am very, very excited to play with this, but I would not be remotely surprised if this ends up losing a point of power in the future. Because, like, to me, these decks are already good, and the reason they haven't sort of percolated down to, like, wider population is mostly, like, they're hard, and they're not, like, ever the exact best thing to do. But I am very surprised to see a deck or an archetype that I regard as this good getting a point of power like this. It just does feel crazy. And going from 8 to 9, I feel like that's incredibly impactful. It just makes Misery like one of the best 4-drops, full stop. Like, this is just an absolutely amazing 4-drop card right now. Heavily encourage people to look at decks with Misery in it. Hood Misery, Thor's Misery, even Thanos Misery. Like, there's just gonna be stuff to do with this at 4-9. Like, this is a crazy, crazy move, in my humble opinion. Absorbing Man has sort of fallen off as a Surfer staple recently, as Surfer has gotten more elite 3-cost cards that can carry buffs very well. It might be worth revisiting here. Brood into Absorbing Man is a powerful thing to do for sure. With Galacta, this is now looking at like 3-4 Broods into 3-4-7 Absorbing Mans if you do them after Galacta. It's not the most amazing thing of all time, but it is relevant, especially in a world where that deck is likely to A, already have Surge, and B, potentially gain Mr. Fantastic First Steps coming soon. There's some real power, I think, in that, and I think that this is not necessarily an attempt to compensate Surfer for losing Galacta, but it is a deck that gets hurt by losing Galacta pretty dramatically. It is just kind of a thing that I think you can do. It's been a long time since Brood Abs Man was dominating games. I don't particularly expect it to be dominating games again, but you might have a second chance at looking at this guy. I also think that at like 5, maybe not, but the more power they're willing to put on this guy, I honestly kind of think that, like, the Brood interaction artificially caps him too hard. Like, if there wasn't Brood in the game, this guy could be way bigger and be in other decks, but the Brood interaction sort of forces them to keep his power relatively low. Whereas I think that, like, in a real world, you could probably, like, if Brood didn't exist, this guy could be, like, 4-6, 4-7. You could be, like, a bigger guy, I think. The fact that Brood exists and is sort of artificially hard capping him because you just don't want to be able to put people in a situation where he's just, like, a 420 or something like that, I honestly kind of wonder if that interaction isn't sort of net bad for this card going in other decks at this point. The Ancient One's Tao Mandala going to 2 cost means that now off a Quinjet, it's 1 cost. I mean, we talked about Misery being a buff to the sort of Hood Misery V-Hand decks. This could very easily go in those Hood Misery V-Hand decks. Tao Mandala copying V-Hand, very, 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 very powerful. Like, I think this is kind of what the Ancient One needed to be an appealing card. It's a cool enough card right now, but chopping some cost off is what's going to make it potentially legitimately playable. This is also like a more competitive slot now. Red Guardian losing a point of power does matter. Is the Ancient One a meaningfully powerful alternative now? That could be really impactful, especially because when you look at 3s right now, both Copycat and, of course, this is notable, Copycat and Gladiator, both in really awkward spots thanks to recent card releases. Neither are very good into Nightmare decks. Copycat will copy downside stuff. Gladiator will pull big stuff. And, of course, even Dormammu stuff, like Gladiator can still pull big stuff out of that. You're pulling your opponent's death. You feel like kind of an idiot. Copycat copies something that destroys something. You feel like kind of an idiot. There have been multiple card releases that have been changing what people are trying to do, and that has sort of made 3 a little bit more open. That combined with a Red Guardian nerf means that there could legitimately be a better space for a deck like this to exist. I'm interested to see what Tao Mandala can do at this new cost in this new context. Lockjaw change to 2-2 activate 1 swap. That's kind of interesting, and it pushes this card away from like the sort of Thanos thing where you need a bunch of things to swap, and much more towards like a High Evo Wasp or Lockjaw Thor type of thing, where it's just turning one thing into big things a lot of the time. That's a really interesting thing to have. Like, I enjoyed the High Evo Lockjaw decks when they existed. I think this card is more fair when it's 1 roll and not a million rolls, converting a small thing into something that is larger than that, but not converting all your small things into a slot machine. I think that this is interesting. I'm mostly interested in sort of like a Thor Evo type of deck construction here, where you're doing like Thor, Wasp, the Zeros, and like Jane fostering them out, and then putting one of them in a Lockjaw and getting a big guy. Red Guardian nerf goes a long way towards making this guy palatable, because one of the big weaknesses of being a small activate is that you can very easily get Red Guardian, especially if you're like using this as a snap condition. That said, I still think people are going to be playing Red Guardian, so that is like the main thing to keep an eye on here, is that you are about to get like your whole, like, I'm going to turn my hammer into a High Evo Hulk thing. Absolutely rug pulled by Red Guardian. Definitely a risk you're going to be running. I do think that this is an interesting card. I will be interested to see what people are able to do with it. But my instinct is that the places where I'm the most afraid of this are like decks that are going to use it like to get their combo reliability off. Like, you do this with a Jubilee in your Hella deck, or with a Jubilee in your Living Tribunal deck, and it's just like a second blink and things like that. Like, there are a couple players who like I think of when I think of this stuff. I think of Husky Puppies, I think of Hella Enjoyer. Those are the people I'm going to be keeping an eye on. Maybe Denish, where it's just like, someone's going to sort of do some lateral thinking about this card, where it's not just like, oh, I'm playing it for value, but I'm playing it to effectively see an extra card in my deck. And that's the risky version of this, I think. Wolfsbane getting a point of power, I think, is basically negligible. I mean, it's nice that, like, you know, if you don't have Sage or whatever, you can play Wolfsbane. But I think the problem is that, like, as a budget Sage, if you wanted to make this better, to be, like, a better budget alternative to Sage, what you'd want to do is, like, buff the ability, not the cost here. Because, like, if you're doing Sage stuff, you're usually doing it in the context of either A, Ravona, which this now no longer works with, or B, Bast, which this now gets less benefit out of. It's like kind of a wash if you're basting this, right? Or like Agent Venom or whatever. My instinct is that if they really wanted to improve this card, the way to do that would be via the actual ability here. But obviously, you probably can't put +3 on that ability, especially because this is a card in the new player experience. So I don't blame them for just like stacking some power on here. But maybe they could have been more aggressive. Going from 1 to 2 kind of does very little. Maybe going from 1 to 3 could have made people actually look twice at this. Rhino going to 2/5 is, I think, something that I like thematically. I think this is a good gag because I almost wish it was 2/6, but now we have like premier 2-drop stat guys are the Lizard and Rhino, and I like that. I think it's cool, right? Like you have 2/4 Spider-Man, you have 2/5 Rhino, you have 2/6 Lizard. I'm not sure I would have put them in that order, but I think it's like a cool little thing where it's like, oh, okay, you know, it's the Spider-Man villains. It's like not street level, but it's kind of street level. I get a kick out of that. I think that 2/5 Rhino is kind of interesting because if you're putting a rock on the board, it's gonna need to be something you turn into upside if you ever want to curve this guy out. Now, there are multiple ways to turn a rock into upside. Like, you can Strange Supreme it, things like that. You could be playing like a zoo deck with board-wide buffs, Ant-Man, all sorts of stuff that can make this good. It's just, I don't know how much I want to be doing any of that when I have so many other Elite 2-drops, right? But, like, one of those other Elite 2-drops is Merlin. Merlin has multiple ways to turn a rock into upside. It's not super off base to think that this is kind of an interesting card to include in your Merlin decks if you can get away with it. But, like, what else are we doing with it? I feel like to justify this card, I feel like I have to do a lot of justifying, basically. I have to do a lot of, like, oh, I'm going to do something to make this good. And I want the card to justify itself. And granted, 2/5, maybe it does just justify itself. Like, maybe it just is good enough to just be like, oh, it's a 2/5. I'm super into that. I like the stats, and there's probably a context in which this makes sense. Maybe you play it in the Sarah deck that I've been playing a lot of, but, like, that deck is really sort of constricted on slots. I'm interested to see how it goes, but I'm not overly optimistic that this necessarily puts him in a good spot. It is good points and can go in a solid points plus tech deck. You could convince me of that, though. A lot of people ascribe to the conspiracy theory that they buff stuff when it is in bundles, but the much more real, I think, conspiracy theory is that they buff stuff when it has, like, MCU tie-ins. Ironheart show just started airing. Ironheart's getting a buff. Going from giving 3 cards +2 to giving 2 cards +3, keeping the output the same, but making the card more playable on curve. 1 to Ironheart, she's now a 3/6. That is not bad. Like, this is a... I'm not going to be like, oh my god, massive buff to Ironheart, but, like, it's a 3-cost card that you never have enough bodies to actually get the full value out of on 3, and now there's a world where you have enough bodies to get the full value out of it on 3. Because I know people are going to be like, oh, it was already a 3/6, but, like, no, you're not playing 3 cards before Ironheart if you're playing her on turn 3. It just isn't happening. But there's a world where you go, like, you know, card, Ironheart, and it's actually really good now. Like, +3 is really good. One note here, though, that I will give. +3 on a back-end card, like +3, not like targeted the way something Galacta is, something that like a back-end buff, like a buff that has to hit stuff that's already on the board, that is a much more palatable place to put +3s. Like, when you look at the +3s that have really been problematic, back when Forge gave +3, or arguably Galacta now, a lot of them are buffs that you get to specifically choose where they go. If you have to go through the work of making sure this buff hits the thing you want to hit, I kind of think it's basically fine. So this is a more interesting card now. I don't necessarily know that it's going to see a drastic amount more play, but it is just kind of a long overdue, like, why don't we just fix how this card works? Because one of the things that really sucks about Ironheart is how god-awful it is to play on turn 3. And now it is no longer god-awful to play her on turn 3. It's actually, like, kind of good. Like, in a world where someone is playing Quicksilver Domino, I can actually see them wanting to do this. Like, that's kind of a lot of power, but I wouldn't necessarily try to do that. But, like, what about, for example, a world where someone's playing 1-drop Lockjaw the Ironheart? That's pretty good. Like, it's not, again, it's not, like, the most amazing thing on Earth, but it is nice that you can play this card on turn 3 and it's not wasting a third of itself anymore. Professor X getting the most questionable of all quote-unquote buffs, which is you can play spells there now. So if you want to polymorph your Professor X into a 6-drop, that'll actually work. So I guess go ahead and do that. It does seem kind of powerful. But please don't do it around me so I don't have to play against your Professor X. Keep that bald boy away from your boy. All right, y'all. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you think of these changes in the comments. I still read all of them. As always, I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.